Hi everybody, it's Miss Ryan here, and today we're going to go over how to UV an object. Before I UV the object, I need to make sure I freeze my transformations and delete all my history on my object. Ever see a lot of random groups in your outliner or a whole bunch of inputs on your channel? What that is history. So see, all this is history. And the more history you have, the more likely your Maya is able to crash. Now, history is nice for undoing, but just like us, our computer can't remember all that without shutting down. So we need to go to Edit, Delete All by Type, History. We also need to go to make sure all of my channels are set to default or frozen. We want all these set to 0. So I'm going to go to Modify, Freeze Transformations. So that was Edit, Delete All by Type, History, and Modify, Freeze Transformations. So now everything's set to 0. Except for scale, of course, because 0 scale would be a non-existing object. Now I'm going to open up the UV editor. As we said in the previous video, your UV editor can be found under UV, UV editor. Now Maya also has a UV editing toolkit, just like the modeling toolkit in your regular viewport Maya. But all the same abilities and tools can be found up here. And while there's lots of different ones that are helpful, we're only going to focus on 4 for now. That's going to be Modify, Unfold, Cut and Sew, Cut, and Move and Sew, finally Modify, Layout. Also note that right now, like we said before, it's in wireframe and that's undesirable. Press 5 to go to Shaded, or go to View and make sure that Shaded is highlighted. This allows us to tell if UVs are overlapping. If they're purple, they're overlapping. If they're dark blue, they're overlapping. If they're light Carolina blue, they're flat and perfect. If they're orange, it means they're reversed. If you need to fix an orange UV, you can find that under Modify Flip. There it is. Modify Flip. It's not one we're going to focus over on today, but if you need to find that, it's under Modify. That's when you have orange UVs. So I'm going to move this over to the side. And the first thing we need to do is do something called a planar projection. What it does, it takes something that's kind of like a camera frame, and it looks at your object from that angle and creates UVs from that axis, just like it's shining a camera on it to get your UVs. So first thing I'm going to do is determine which axis has the best silhouette for my object. To me, it looks like the front axis, which is going to be my z-axis. To do a planar projection, you go to UV in your modeling drop-down menu, go to Planar, and always click the gray square. In these options here, I'm going to pick my axis, which will be the z-axis. I always make sure that Keep Image Width and Height ratio is turned on, otherwise I'll have some problems. This is checked automatically. This is checked automatically. Do not check this. This creates a new UV set and we're not going to do that. So I'm going to hit Project. And you can see there looks like a little square or picture plane that's shining on your object. If we look at the UV editor, we actually get to start with something that looks like our UV object. This makes our life 10 times easier when it comes to UV. Now, instead of the previous video, what we need to do is break this model down to the simple shapes. Then we can model it like our UV primitives. Decide, do we want to cut it up like a box, cut it up like a cylinder, or cut it up like an organic object? Usually it's a combination of cylinders and boxes. Boxes in the sense that you want to keep as many things attached as possible because we want the least amount of shells as possible. But that doesn't mean you can't cut things up. In fact, you should for mask and if it causes weird warping or you don't get to use all of the space. And we'll do the thing where we cut off the top and bottom and cut along a spine where you can't see that seam. For now, we're just going to break up this part by cutting off all the extremities or the things that stick out so we can deal with just simple shapes. So that means I'm going to cut off these guys. I'm going to cut off this. I'm going to cut off this. And I'm going to cut off the feet. Now, I actually am not going to select my edge loops in the UV editor. I'm going to pull the UV editor over to my side monitor. It is 10 times easier if you're working with two monitors. And I can actually select my edge loops here. So I'll right click and hold and go to edge mode. I'm going to find where my edges are connected so I can see this arm is connected to the table here. And I'm going to select edge loop all the way around. Usually cuts don't work because you missed an edge loop that you are trying to cut. Now, hopefully when you double click it, it will select the edge loop all the way around. But on square-like objects, sometimes it doesn't do that. So since my edge loop double click didn't work and select all the edge loops, I'll click one and shift click the other. I can tell it's highlighted because it turned orange. I can select multiple edges at once to cut. So I'm just going to go ahead and select all these edges that attach the arms to this part of the table. Okay, that looks good. That looks good. That looks good. That looks good. All right. So now I can make my cut. There's no scissors in my viewport where I can just go cut, cut, cut. I have to go back into my UV editor and hit either cut, cut, or shift X. You know it will work because these will become bolded. Let's look in the viewport as well. When I have the UV editor up, I can actually see my UVs applied to the model and my cut locations. So I'm going to click off so these aren't selected anymore. See how they're bolded white now? That means that my cuts went through. This still doesn't guarantee that they worked 100% though. To do that, we need to separate our UV shells, which are what all these groupings of UVs are called. To do that, I need to go into UV shell mode. So I'm going to right click and hold and go to UV shells. A quick note, you have a UV for each vertice. So if I went to just regular UV, I could select the individual vertices as UVs. But UV shell selects what's not cut apart. I can tell I have two UV shells now because when I hover over here, only the top part and the arms are selected, and I can tell that the bottom is now separate. My move, rotate, and scale tools work just like they do in my viewport. So I can hit W on my keyboard and move the objects just like I would in my viewport to separate them to make them easy to work with. When we're done, we want everything to be in this corner right here. The corner that's marked off with the bold black lines here and the green and red lines here. But we can use the entire area for our workspace while we're waiting for that. If you use a tileable texture, it will actually tile across the whole part. But when working in Substance Painter, we want everything to be in this corner right here. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to separate these arms from the top of the table. I'll also separate the little handles as well. So I'll move it over here. And I'm going to select the edge loops, right click and hold edge loop mode that connect the handle to the table. So those are selected. I select more here. Those are selected. Those are selected. And I can go ahead, I don't have to wait, I can select these two. So when I go back to my UV editor and hit Shift X, I can cut these all at once. I want you to note I accidentally select these two. If I hold down Shift and click them again, I can disconnect from them or have them unselected essentially. There we go. That's fixed. Alright, alright, alright. Let's get these selected. That looks good, that looks good. I'm sorry about that. My dog is here with me. I'm actually making this video at home and a car drove by, so now she's upset. Alright, I think I got them all selected. Oh, found some I missed. Yeah, I missed all of that. Wow, I really did miss all of it. Alright, so now I have all those selected. So I can come back into my UV editor, hit Shift X or go to Cut, right click and hold UV shell mode, click the shells, and hit W if my move tool doesn't show up, and separate them from the object. So now I need to do the same thing over here. I need to separate the legs from the table and the top of the table from the legs. So I'm going to move this over and I'm going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to come down, try double click, but if double click doesn't work, that's okay. You can just rotate around. Let's look over here. And you can see I'm selecting these particular edge loops because they're the ones where the joint is, where they connect to the other part of the model. Not those edge loops. This is actually an ingon here. This may cause me problems UVing later because if your geometry is incorrect, it won't let you UV it essentially. But let's just keep going. We can always UV these wheels last and fix them. I think I got everything selected. And while I'm here, I'm just going to go ahead and separate the feet as well. So I'll select that bottom edge loop. Now one thing that's going to happen is I'll be left with two kind of random faces right here. And I don't want really tiny UV shells. So I'm going to actively decide that these faces are going to stay connected to the legs. And I'll just cut here. So that means I'm going to not select these two edge loops, but I'll still cut off the feet here. So it's a good thing I decided to take a look at the feet before cutting, because otherwise I was going to end up with a shell that only had two faces, which is not exactly desirable. Okay, make sure I get the inside faces there. And if you make too many cuts, and often I do initially, you can always sew things back up together. We're going to learn about move and sew in a moment. Okay, I think I got them. So let's go back to our UV editor and make our cuts. So I'll go to cut, or I'll hit Shift X. I'll right click and hold, go to UV shell, and now I can separate them from each other. So clearly I missed an edge loop here. That's why that leg is still attached. You can also see I have some really tiny edges there. Let's take a look at what those are. I can actually select a shell in here, and if it will be selected in my viewport. And that I actually want those to be separate, so I'm not going to panic about that. I am going to be concerned that this one is still attached to the base of the table. Do you see how it's still attached and how this leg is still attached here? So I got to go back and look. And see what I missed. So let's see. This is the one, I selected that one. Why don't you want to separate? There it is. It's this edge loop right here. So Shift Cut, UV shell, separate. Let's do the same thing with the leg. Let's take a look and see why that leg was still attached. So here's the high, oh, there it is. Do you see it? This edge right here. Go back in my UV editor, Shift X. Let's see if I can separate it now. And I can. Alright. So now I just have to separate these arms from the top of the table, or whatever you would call that. The little bottom tray, that's what we're going to go with. Right. All right. All right. All right. Really just need to get this separated. I don't want floating faces. That's why I'm not cutting right here. Don't want this selected right here. No floating faces. No floating faces. Alright. Think we're good. Shift X. And now I can separate the arms. Oop, it looks like I missed a cut. Let's see where I missed. Here you are. So where did you... Here. Boom. Shift X. UV shell. Move it over. And notice that I'm kind of keeping ones that are similar grouped together, so they'll be easy to work with. And also note that I haven't done a lot with these flat planes. This tray and this part of the tray, we're going to do something different. But we have a couple of more cuts to do with the others. Actually, we can go ahead and cut these too if we wanted. We don't have to do this special technique I'm going to show you with this one and this one, but just for the sake of demo, we're going to hold off on those. We're going to make all of our other final cuts on these arms. Semi-final. No cut is ever truly final. You never know when you have to start sewing things back together and make additional cuts. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually cut this similar to a cylinder, where there is one seam long ways going across the body and the bottom and top are removed. Well, since we cut these from the tray, most of them have holes for the bottom of the top. So that means we only need to cut one seam long ways that couldn't be seen. The one that's least likely to be seen are these edge loops on the inside here. So I'm going to double click those. Perfect. They don't go past that. Usually edge loops will stop with the double click at an intersection point. Hold down Shift, double click, rotate, hold down Shift, double click, rotate, hold down Shift, double click, scroll down, hold down Shift, double click, hold down Shift, double click, hold down Shift, double click, hold down Shift, double click. The feet are a little weird, but we'll do the same thing on those. We'll talk about them a little bit more in a little bit. We'll do that on the inside of the handle here. That's probably a better cut, but it will be fine. Alright. Yeah. We'll do that for the long bars as well. So I'm just going to cut them on this bottom inside seam that I don't think people would be able to see. Alright. So I'm going to go back to my UV editor, hit Shift X, and now it's finally time to start doing some unfolding. I'll still make some additional cuts as I go along, but I can start unfolding now. I'm going to go with these curves first. To unfold, I right click and hold, go to UV shell, and click the shell that I want to unfold. Yes, I can shift click multiple shells if I want to unfold multiple things at once. Or I can click and drag and select multiple things, unfold them at once. I'm going to go to Modify, Unfold. Now you can see these unfold very nicely. They look like a grid. They're Carolina blue. There's not a lot of distortion. Let's see why this one didn't unfold here. There we go. It just didn't get selected for some reason. I'm going to keep all these guys that are similar together. So I'll modify, unfold these, or I can hit Control U, Command U on a Mac. Beautiful UVs. I'm going to do the same things on this guy. Ooh, we have something interesting in there. Do you see this situation? This basically is an extrusion, and it has darts that makes it curve. And by darts I mean these little diagonal guys right here. So we'll go back to how to address that in a little bit. I'm going to hit G on these guys as well, and those have the same problem. We'll figure out, and we may not have to do anything about them. It depends how those UVs are being applied. Now, even though we can barely see what's going on with these shells, we know that we made our cuts in the right places. So we can go ahead and go to Modify, Unfold, Modify, Unfold, or I can hit G for the last tool used. But where did they go? These shells only have 4 faces. That's not a lot of information to hold together. So the UV editor wants to automatically make these really, really small. I can hit R and scale them up. Eventually they'll show back up. Let's see, I may have to select them in my viewport here. Nope, they were these guys. Okay, got it all selected. Let's scale it up in my UV editor. So if this happens to you and they're just too small and it disappears and it's impossible to find them, we can actually do a little cheat. And this is actually the same little cheat that we're going to do for our shelves here on the table. When you're unfolding and your unfolds just seem a little weird or you need to look at your model differently, you can actually planar project on individual shells. Now, usually I only want you to use planar projection, but this we could use cylindrical projection because it's almost like a perfect cylinder. Rather than doing that, I'm going to use planar and I'm going to use something called unfold legacy. So I'm going to have these faces selected, go to UV, planar, and I'm going to project this time on the Y axis so my camera will shine up and down. I'll click apply. And you can see my shell was only applied to those faces. You can also see that my cuts, other than the ones that separated it from the table, were sewn back up. So if you need to sew up some edges, and move and sew is just not going to work, and don't worry, we will go over that eventually. The best thing to do is to just reproject. And I'll select my new edge and make a new cut. Shift X. Now, rather than unfold this traditionally, I'm going to click the shell, go to Modify, Unfold, and this time I'm going to hit the gray square. And I'm going to go from Unfold 3D to Legacy, which is what we used to use to unfold. I want Pin Unselected UVs to be turned on. Since this is vertical, I want it to fold out long ways. So I'm going to select under Unfold Constraint, Horizontal. I'll hit Apply. Oh, it looks like I accidentally had some other UVs selected. So let's move this guy over here. Sometimes Legacy doesn't like the UV shell and it will unfold everything. If that happens to you, right click and hold and go to Regular UV and just click and drag to select all the UVs in the shell. Now I'll unfold it Legacy horizontally and I have a beautiful shell. Now make sure you change it back to Unfold 3D. If you leave it under Legacy, whenever you hit Control U or go to Modify Unfold, those are the settings that it will save. So I'm going to hit Close now that I've changed my settings. And I'm going to do the same thing to some of these other meshes here. So for example, let's go over to this guy. Our other ones that ended up so small, it just disappeared. So I'll go to Face Mode. I'll select all the faces that I want to be part of this UV shell. And I just double click the faces and it selected them all the way around. I'll go to UV, Planar Projection. I want it on the Y axis so it goes up and down, and I'll hit Apply. So you can see that worked. Now I just clicked off to exit out of that. Right click and hold Edge Mode. Select that inner seam there. Go to my UV editor. Shift X. I'm going to move this UV shell. Since I'm going to use Legacy and Legacy does not like shells that much, I'm just going to right click and go to regular UV mode and click and drag to select all the UVs. Remember there's a UV at each vertex. Now I'll go to Modify, Unfold, and this time click the gray square so I can go to Legacy. I'm going to unfold them horizontally. I'll click apply. Beautiful. We can do something similar with these guys over here. So I'm not going to reproject on these. I'm not going to do planar projection again, but I am going to use legacy unfold. So I'll go to UV, and I'm just going to do both these at once. I selected all my UVs. Modify, unfold, hit the gray square. Then I'm going to unfold these vertically because they are going long way and I want them to unfold like a scroll. So I'll hit apply. Beautiful, beautiful shells. We'll just put these away here. Here's the last guys. So we're going to do something different. We're going to planar project these on the y-axis too, and then we have some options. I think we can just cut it along long ways, but we may want to make multiple cuts to make it look like our box UV. It depends how it unfolds. So I'm going to move this over, and I'm going to go click on this top face here. It's already a UV shell, so all I have to do is click on it. And I'll go to UV, planar projection, and I'm going to project from the y-axis. And you can see in my UV editor, guess what? It looks like a UV a table shelf. It looks how it's supposed to. So I'm going to move over here and I'm going to do the same thing to this shell. I'm going to do UV, planar projection, apply. All right. Now let's cut our seam to make it unfold. So I'm going to go under here and I'm going to cut two seams. I'm going to cut, well, actually 3 seams. I'm going to cut here, here, and here. Did I lie to you again? I believe I did. Because what I want it to do is to go frrrr. So I'm going to also cut on these diagonals, or these corners rather. I say diagonals because I know when I unfold it, it's going to look like a diagonal. And that just comes from experience. Alright, so I cut on the diagonals, I cut on the sides and the back. And if you look at a cube, I'm cutting it the exact same way I cut a cube. So I'll go into my UV editor. I'm going to hit Shift X, right click and hold, drag to UV, click the shell, modify. I'm still going to click the gray box. See, it was stuck on legacy. So I'm going to click unfold 3D, apply and close. That's beautiful. Look at it, guys. It did exactly what I wanted it to do. It's a good day. Yay! I'll rotate it a little bit, maybe shrink it down and move it to the side. So now I'm going to do the same thing with this guy. I'm going to go to edge mode. So this guy has some cuts here, and I don't want those cuts. So this is a perfect time to talk about sew and move and sew. Sew will simply sew back a cut that you made, but the problem is a lot of time it distorts. So I always use move and sew. Move and sew can take 2 different UV shells that are far apart and automatically snap them together. Alright, so that didn't sew back. Let's try, let's make sure we're selecting the right edge. We are. Let's try just regular sew then. So if it's not sewing together, that probably means that there's something wrong with my geometry. We're not going to worry about it then. We're going to just make our cuts as normal and figure it out later. I have a suspicion that there's a hidden face inside of this table. So I'll select that edge. Let's see, I want to unfold there, there. It's connected. It's already split at the corner, so I don't have to worry about that. Alright. Think I'm ready to go ahead and make my cut. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to hit Shift X. And I'm going to go to Modify, Unfold. Look how beautifully it unfolded. That's great. We'll just move that over there. Still don't know what's quite going on here, but it looks good, so I'm not going to stress out about it. This didn't get unfolded, so we'll go ahead and unfold that and move it with its friends. Alright. So here's these guys, and these guys are a little problematic. Since I don't quite know how I want to cut up these wheels, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to separate them from part of the leg, and we need to check out Move and Sew one more time. So this is a great opportunity to learn about that. So I'm just going to separate these wheels from the feet there so I can figure out how to UV them by themselves. In a little bit I'll use Move and Sew to reattach them if I want. I may not want to, but given how small they are, I probably want to. So I'm going to unfold all these guys. Beautiful. Let's take a look at what's going on with these wheels here. So we do have those ingons, so that may interfere with our ability to cut. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the top or the faces on the sides. Kind of like a cylinder, only I'm removing the side faces rather than the tops and the bottoms. And I'll select a spine where it touches the bottom there. I'm going to Shift X. Let's see how that works. So that does work, but I have a feeling if I unfold this, it's going to disappear. Let's see. Yep. So that creates a problem, right? So what we're going to do, we're going to pick a single edge for this part to reconnect to another shell using Move and Sew. So if I click this, the edge that it shares with another shell is already highlighted. To be clear, I right clicked and I'm in edge mode, click the edge, and then I could see what edges connect. So now I'm going to go to Move and Sew, and it snapped to an edge that it shared. I'll click this UV shell and I'll unfold it. Alright, so now we have something we at least understand. I don't like that this part is connected. I'd rather it be connected here. So these two match. I also think that I can sew this edge together and this will just stick out. So I'll do that. Modify. Oh, sorry. Sew, move and sew. I can also use G to sew them up because it's the last key that I used or tool that I used. I'll go back to edge mode. I'm going to cut it here, Shift X. I'm going to sew it back together here, move and sew, move and sew. When I'm done, I'll go to UV shell, click on it, modify, unfold it again. And I'm going to do those with all the wheels. Alright. So we already got some of the faces cut. Well, I think this is the one we just UV'd. Let's see. I want to UV this one, which is this one right here. Yeah. So let's select. You know what's going to be faster? For me to select these faces. Instead of making all those tiny cuts. And go to UV, planar projection, and project from the x-axis, or is it the? It may be the z-axis I need to project on. Let's see. Is it? We're about to find out. It is. All right. That was so much easier. Planar projection is your friend. Let's move these down here so we can do stuff with them. And I'm going to use move and sew again. So I actually have this face is part of this shell right here, or this wheel. So I'm going to pick the edge that they share. Perfect. Modify, move and sew. Right click, hold, drag to UV shell, click it, modify, unfold again. There we go. And I know that looks a little freaky, but it works. We keep them together. And this curve can pose a problem if you have a very rectilinear texture. If you texture it Substance Painter, it won't. So let's go ahead and do the same thing with this guy over here. Cut and sew, move and sew, select, cut and sew, move and sew. Wrong one. Let's just go ahead and unfold, and then we can tell where to move this guy. Unfold. Ooh, this one's a little different. I actually kind of like that. It stayed connected right here. Nah, we'll keep it consistent. Move and sew. Move and sew. UV shell mode, modify, unfold. Same thing with you over here. Let's move and sew. UV shell, select, modify, unfold. We'll split you just like we did the others. And the nice thing is no one's going to be looking real close to these wheels. So that saves us some time as well. So I'm going to go to move and sew. Where's the other shell? It got left over here. Hey shell, what you doing? Come hang out with us. Move and sew. UV shell, modify, unfold. Still got one left over. Cut, move and sew. Cut, move and sew. UV shell, boom, boom. Modify, unfold. That is not it. Cut right here, Shift X, and they don't have to look exactly the same unless if I'm stacking them, but it makes me happy. So I'm making them look the same. Shift X, so. So, UV shell, modify, unfold. All right. So we have successfully UV'd all of our shells. Hooray! So what I'm going to do now is I need to lay them out in this corner right here, the one where the bold line ends here and the green and red is here. Now, honestly, with something as rectilinear as this, I would actually lay my shells out manually, which is selecting the shells, moving them over, scale them appropriately. But I want to save you guys some time. So I'm going to click and drag and select all of my shells. Go to Modify, Layout. And that's actually a pretty good layout. It's rare that Maya lays these out in a way that makes sense, because you want your areas that would need the largest amount of detail or the most important to take the most room in your UV corner here. And the reason is because the texture can be larger. This is going to translate as an image file. But, I mean, the wheels are the least important. The tables are the most important. I would like for these to be close to the same size, so I may change them a little bit. But I still want them to take up the most room. And I also like to group similar UVs together just so I understand what everything is. I'm going to move these over here. And I'm not going to teach you how to stack shells. That's going to be in an advanced UVing. Y'all can just hang out over here. This can definitely be larger. You don't want them to be too close together, but you still want to take up as much room as possible. You guys can be a little bit larger since I have the room here. Just want to make sure they're at least close to the same size. Alright, so I have my UVs laid out. Let's see how they actually look on the model. So I'm going to hit this little checkered board right here. And what this does, this shows me how my textures would be applied to the model if they were there. So I have some diagonals, which is fine, and it's not as good as you're using tileable textures like we are, but in Substance Painter it's fine. In Substance Painter you can paint over seams, but you can see there's little to no distortion. So this is a good set of UVs. I'm not quite happy with these, but it's because we have them at a diagonal, it will be okay. I also want my squares to be about the same size. I want them to line up if I have a tileable texture. And I can do that by scaling them and moving them around in my UV editor. You can see when I actually have this UV shell selected off camera, and I can move it around to change how it lines up with my square. So that's just something to think about. But now that I have my UVs in order, I'm going to apply a texture to my model. Now I have two different tileable textures, and I can actually just make two different shaders and not have to make a separate set of UVs for each different texture. First, I'm going to delete the history on my model, so I'm going to go to Object Mode, Edit, Delete by Type, History. So now all this will go away. I won't slow down my computer. And I'm going to go to my hypershade. Now, normally on y'all's Maya, the hypershade will be up here in a circle that looks like a little sphere. I actually have a different workspace than you guys do, so that's why it's not here for me. You can also find it under Panels, Panel Hypershade. Maya didn't like that. And I can actually tear off that panel, so I can have it in a separate window if I want to, etc. Let's shrink this down significantly. You also note that I don't have the material viewer, but I can just add that by going to Window. I learned Maya on old school Maya, so it's just not important to me. So that's why I don't have it up. Property Editor. But I'm going to make mine look a little bit more like y'all. So now I have my material viewer and my property editor. I also have my create menu over here. And I'm going to create either a Lambert, a Fong, or a blend. I like blends, they're my favorite. I'm going to name this wood texture. Well, actually, this will be my marble. a blend shiny, so it wouldn't make sense for wood, unless if it was like polyurethane wood. And if that was the case, I would use a Fong. So under your property editor, you can also find this under your attribute editor, which are the little things that look like thermometers. There's a little checkered board next to color. That means texture. I'm going to click on it. And click on it again since it didn't like that I clicked on it. There we go. It's going to bring up this menu. You're going to select File. That will take me to this menu. There's going to be a manila folder next to image name. Click that. Now you should put your files in your source image folder for your project. Remember, that can be found under File. The first time you make your file, project window, new project, save it, etc. And then every time after that you'll go to File, Set Project. I was a bad person and I didn't make my project, so I'm just going to go find them in my downloads folder. But make sure that you put them in your source image folder. So let's see, I got my marble. Cool. And you can see in my material viewer it actually looks like my marble, right? So now I can just move my hypershade over to my other window, and I'm going to select the parts that I want to be marble. So that's going to be this face right here and this face right here. With my middle mouse button, I'm going to click and drag with your middle mouse button, the middle mouse button, and drag while holding down the middle mouse button onto my selection. But nothing happens. The reason nothing happens is because I don't have textured mode turned on. You can hit the number 6 or the little checkered board sphere at the top of your viewport. Now I have lovely marble added to my table. So I should, since those are only 2 faces, I should have applied my wood texture first. So I'm just going to double click the whole object, make my new material, which we'll make it a Fong this time. So it will be like polyurethane wood. Under my properties editor, I'll click the checkered board, I'll click the file, manila folder. Your texture should be saved under source images. I'll get my wood texture, beautiful, and I'll click and drag with my middle mouse button that material onto my object there. And you can see the little problems that we're having because of those 2. We can go back and look at that since it's just 2 of them where they're sideways like that. And I'm going to click back on these 2 faces so I can make them marble again. Alright, click and drag with my middle mouse button onto my selection. There we go. I got a beautiful table. One more adjustment and we're done. I'm going to go back to my UV editor. And these little guys are the ones that are diagonal. So I'm just going to select them. Yes. And rotate them so they're going up and down. And they won't stretch. Did it fix it? It did. Let's click my checkered board off. Look at them. They're great. Let's exit over UV editor so it doesn't have the blue cast. Click off. Object mode, please. Yay! It's beautiful. So everyone, that's how you UV and apply tileable textures. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful day.